The document arrived on a Tuesday. Not by ship, not by soldier, not by any dramatic means the Dominion had expected. It came through a standard communications relay, encoded in the same format humanity used for trade agreements and border notices. A 6-paragraph file. Plain language. No decorative header, no official seal, no long list of titles belonging to whoever sent it. Just words, clean and direct, delivered to the Dominion's nearest receiving station like a simple piece of mail. The station operator who received it read it twice. Then she flagged it for her supervisor. Her supervisor read it once and immediately forwarded it up the chain without adding any comment of his own. By the time it reached Grand Marshal Oren's desk, it had passed through 11 sets of hands, and not one of those 11 people had written a single word of response to it. Oren read it slowly. He had spent 60 years in military service. He had received surrender documents, war declarations, ceasefire proposals, and every variation of desperate message a losing enemy could compose. He had a sense for tone the way a musician has a sense for pitch, and the tone of this document was something he could not immediately name. It was not angry. It was not fearful. It was not theatrical. It simply said, "Here is what we are. Here is what we have built. Here is what we will do if you cross our border without our permission." It listed no emotional appeals. It made no reference to justice or honor or the rights of free peoples. It described, in plain terms, the exact nature of the response that would follow an uninvited military incursion into human space. The language was the language of a technical manual. Precise, complete, final. At the bottom, where most documents of this kind carried a signature and a date, there was a single sentence. It read, "This notice will not be repeated." Oren set it down. He looked at it for a moment. Then he called his senior council together. The council meeting lasted 3 hours. Most of that time was spent not discussing the warning itself, but discussing what kind of species sends a warning like that. The Dominion had made contact with 62 civilizations across its 3 centuries of expansion. 41 of those civilizations had submitted without significant resistance. 14 had fought and lost. 7 had managed to negotiate terms that left them with some form of limited autonomy inside the Dominion structure. Not one of them, in the first moment of contact, had sent something like this. Counselor Neva sat at the far end of the table and did not speak for most of the meeting. She was the council's oldest member, and she had made a long career out of understanding new civilizations before the military was sent to deal with them. She had read the document 4 times since receiving her copy that morning. She had also, in the hours before the meeting, pulled everything available on human history from the Dominion's research archives. There was not much. Humanity had been observed from a distance for less than 2 decades. What the archives contained were surface records, population figures, energy signatures, the general layout of their colonies, the basic structure of their governing body. Nothing deep, nothing that told you what a species was actually made of. But what Neva had found, in a small footnote attached to an early survey report, was a single paragraph written by the scout who had first detected human transmissions. The scout had noted, almost as an aside, that human history, fragments of which had been decoded from their own broadcasts, appeared to be a long, unbroken record of catastrophe followed by survival. Ice ages, plagues, wars of a scale that had reshaped continents. And after every single one of those events, without exception, the species had rebuilt. Neva had underlined that paragraph. She had not told anyone why. When she finally spoke in the council meeting, she said only one thing. She said the document should be taken seriously and that she recommended a diplomatic response before any military decision was made. She said it calmly, and she said it clearly, and then she sat back and watched the rest of the council dismiss her point in under 4 minutes. The consensus in the room was straightforward. The Dominion had done this 41 times. A new civilization, no matter how confident its opening message, followed a predictable arc once real force was demonstrated. The warning was not a threat. It was nerves. It was a young species that had never seen what the Dominion could actually do, trying to sound larger than it was. Grand Marshal Oren agreed with that assessment. He was not careless or arrogant in his agreement. He was experienced, and experience told him that this was a pattern, and patterns were reliable. He authorized a response. Not a diplomatic one. A demonstration. A single battle group would cross the border, take one of the outer human colonies, and hold it. No unnecessary destruction. Clean and controlled. The kind of move that made the shape of the future very clear to whoever was watching. The response to humanity's document would not be words. Meanwhile, on a space station above a cold moon near the edge of human territory, Ambassador Lyra Solis received the Dominion's silence and understood what it meant. She had written the warning herself. She had chosen every word with care, and she had meant all of them. She had given the document to the Dominion envoys with steady hands and a steady face, and she had watched them read it with the faint, comfortable smiles of people who had never once been surprised by anything a new species did. She had known, even then, what their silence would eventually mean. She made one call to Admiral Rena Vasile. The call lasted less than a minute. Solis said the Dominion had not responded. Vasile said she understood. Neither of them said anything else, because nothing else needed to be said. The plans had been in place for a long time. The warning had been the last step of a very long preparation, not the first. Solis ended the call and looked out the station window at the dark between the stars. Somewhere out there, the Dominion's battle group was already moving. She stayed where she was. The colony was called Dunn's Rock. It sat on a small, airless moon at the outer edge of human space, and it had been a working mine for 30 years. Iron ore mostly, some rare metals. The kind of place that existed on maps, but not in conversations, populated by a few thousand workers who had come out there for the pay and stayed because the silence suited them. It was not a strategic location. It was not a symbol of human power or pride. The Dominion chose it precisely because of that. A quiet place, easily taken, with minimal resistance. A clean first lesson. Fleet Commander Brace led the battle group. He was a careful officer, not a reckless one, and he had reviewed the mission parameters 3 times before departure. The orders were simple. Cross the border, establish a presence above Dunn's Rock, send a landing party to secure the colony, broadcast the Dominion's terms of integration to any human receiver within range. Hold the position and wait for a response. He expected a response within 48 hours. Probably sooner. New civilizations, when they saw a Dominion fleet above one of their worlds, had a way of finding their willingness to talk very quickly. The battle group arrived at Dunn's Rock after 6 days of travel. Long-range scanners confirmed the colony's location. Power readings were consistent with a working settlement. The approach was smooth. Brace gave the order to take up orbital position, and the fleet moved into formation with the routine calm of a crew that had done this kind of thing before. Then the power readings changed. Not gradually, all at once. Every energy signature from the colony's surface went dark in the space of about 4 seconds, as if someone had thrown a single switch. The scanners adjusted. The analysts ran a diagnostic on the instruments. The instruments were working fine. The colony was simply no longer producing any detectable power output. Brace ordered a visual scan. The colony was still there. The structures were intact. The mining equipment was visible. The landing pads were present. But nothing was moving. No life signs. No heat signatures consistent with human bodies. No communication signals of any kind. The place looked, from orbit, exactly like a settlement that had been carefully and completely evacuated. He ordered a landing party down anyway. 12 soldiers, fully equipped, with orders to enter the colony and report what they found. They found nothing. Clean floors. Personal items left behind in orderly fashion, as if people had packed only what they needed. Food still in the storage units, though the cold systems had been powered down. Work logs terminated at a precise time, all of them on the same day, as if a shift had simply ended and no new shift had ever begun. The settlement had not been abandoned in panic. It had been emptied with purpose. The landing party spread out to search the perimeter. One of the soldiers moved toward the mining tunnels on the north side of the colony. She got about 40 meters in before she found the first device. She recognized it immediately as explosive, though the design was unfamiliar. She told the others to stop moving. She counted what she could see from where she was standing. Then she stopped counting at 37 and called for an immediate withdrawal. The battle group pulled back to a safe distance. Brace sat with the report for a long time. The colony had been cleared. The tunnels had been packed with explosives. The evacuation had happened before the fleet arrived, which meant it had been ordered before the battle group had even crossed the border, which meant the humans had known they were coming before they had come. He sent a report to the Dominion Command. He did not touch the colony again. 3 days later, 3 Dominion resupply depots in the interior of Dominion space stopped responding to communications. They were not near the border. They were not near any human territory. They were established installations, each one decades old, each one staffed and functional as of their last check in 48 hours prior. Ships were sent to investigate all 3. All 3 ships found the same thing: empty space. Not wreckage, not debris, no energy residue, no distress signal, no sign of battle. The depots were simply gone, as cleanly as if they had never existed. The analysts at Dominion Command worked for 2 weeks trying to find an explanation. They found none. Admiral Rena Vasile did not broadcast a response to Brace's crossing of the border. She did not issue a statement. She did not send a message to the Dominion's leadership. She read the report from the Dunn's Rock evacuation team, confirmed the colony population had been fully resettled on a secondary world 2 weeks before the Dominion fleet arrived, then authorized the next 7 actions on the pre-prepared list and went to bed at her usual time. On the ground, a long way from that conversation, Sergeant Arodin sat in the rear of a transport that was taking his unit to a border world called Heron's Pass. He was 29 years old and had been in the military for 7 years, and in those 7 years he had been in 2 small skirmishes along colonial trade routes and spent a lot of time on stations doing exactly nothing. He was not sure this would be different. He was not sure it would be the same. He had a letter in his jacket pocket. He had started writing it 2 years ago and had never finished it. It was addressed to his younger sister back on Earth. He kept meaning to send it and kept deciding the words were not quite right. He looked out the transport's small window at the dark outside and thought about what he would add to the letter when they landed. He thought maybe he would find the right words soon. The transport flew on. Heron's Pass grew larger in the window. Below it, in the rock and the dust of a world that had never been particularly beautiful, the automated systems his unit had spent 3 months seeding into the terrain waited quietly for whoever came next. Humanity did not respond to the Dominion's first move with soldiers or speeches. It responded the way it always had, with preparation that was already done. 6 months into the war, the Dominion held 9 human worlds. On paper, that looked like progress. 9 worlds was 9 worlds. Their flags flew there, their administrators had moved in, their soldiers patrolled the streets and the mining roads and the cold flat plains of planets that had once belonged to someone else. Grand Marshal Oren looked at those 9 worlds on the map every morning, and every morning the map told him the same comfortable story. The Dominion was winning. The map did not tell him what it cost to hold those 9 worlds. It did not tell him that on Heron's Pass, the 3rd largest of the occupied territories, Dominion patrols were losing an average of 2 soldiers per week to devices buried in the roads, and that every time an engineering team cleared one section, new devices appeared in a section that had been cleared the week before. It did not tell him that the automated defense networks left behind by the humans were not running out of power because they were drawing from sources the Dominion's engineers kept failing to locate. It did not tell him that soldiers on 4 of the 9 worlds had stopped doing night patrols entirely, not because of any official order, but because the soldiers on night patrol kept not coming back. The humans were not there. That was the thing that made it all so strange. The civilian populations had been evacuated before the Dominion arrived on every single world, which meant there was no one to administer, no one to make an example of, no leverage to use. The Dominion held territory that had been deliberately emptied. They were garrisoning ghost towns, and the ghost towns were fighting back. Sergeant Arodin was not on any of those 9 worlds. He was on the other side of the border, on a ridge above a dry valley on Heron's Pass, watching. That was most of what his unit did: watch, report, and occasionally do things the official reports described as maintenance operations, but which mostly involved moving silently through Dominion-held territory at night and leaving small packages in specific locations. He had been shot twice in 6 months. The first time was a graze across the left shoulder that he had sealed himself with the kit on his belt and not reported until 3 days later because reporting it would have taken him off the line, and he did not want to go off the line. The second time was more serious, a hit to his right side that had required actual medical attention and 2 weeks of recovery in a field station. He had not told his sister about either of them in his letters. He had written 4 letters since arriving on Heron's Pass and sent none of them, because each one felt like it needed one more thing added before it was ready. On the Dominion's capital station, Ambassador Lyra Solis was spending her days in the station library. She had been detained there for 5 months. The Dominion did not call it detention. They called it extended diplomatic residence, which meant she had a comfortable room, access to the public areas of the station, and a polite officer named Ren assigned to accompany her everywhere she went. She was not mistreated. She was given food she could eat and information she was allowed to read, and all the quiet time in the world. She used the time to read everything. The station library held 3 centuries of Dominion records, administrative reports, military histories, trade documents, census data from every civilization the Dominion had ever absorbed. Solis read slowly and carefully, the way she read everything, making notes in a small book she kept in her jacket pocket. Officer Ren watched her read and occasionally asked what she was looking for. Solis always said she was just curious. Ren looked like she did not entirely believe that, but she never pressed. Dominion officials came to speak with Solis every few weeks. They were always polite. They usually asked some version of the same question. When would humanity consider opening peace negotiations? Solis always gave them the same answer. Humanity had already communicated its position in full, and if the Dominion wished to review that communication, she could provide another copy. None of them ever asked for another copy. Counselor Neva was the only Dominion official who came to see Solis without a prepared agenda. She came twice, and both times she simply sat down across from Solis in the library and looked at whatever Solis was reading. The second time, she asked a quiet question. Had anyone in the human government actually expected the Dominion to take the warning seriously? Solis considered the question for a moment. Then she said honestly that she had not expected it personally. She had hoped. But hope and expectation were different things, and the people who had written the response plans had worked on the assumption that the warning would be ignored. Neva was quiet for a while after that. Then she asked how long those plans had been in development. Solis told her. The number of years made Neva close her eyes briefly. On the other side of the war, Grand Marshal Oren had begun to understand something that the map had not been able to show him. The humans were not fighting to hold ground. They had never been fighting to hold ground. Every position they gave up had been given up deliberately, and every position they gave up had been made into a problem before they left it. They were not retreating. They were redirecting the war into a shape that suited them, and the shape it was taking was one in which the Dominion held territory it could not safely use, garrisoned by soldiers who were tired and confused, supplied through lines that kept getting cut in ways that made no tactical sense. He asked his intelligence department for a full assessment of human military doctrine. The assessment came back 3 weeks later. It was a long document, carefully written, and its conclusion was brief. Human military doctrine appeared to have no single consistent form. Every engagement produced different tactics. Individual units made decisions independently of any visible command structure. There was no pattern to predict because the humans seemed to treat each situation as a new problem requiring a new solution, and they were very good at solving new problems. Oren read the assessment and set it aside. He called Counselor Neva. He did not say she had been right. She did not say it either. They discussed, in careful and measured language, the casualty figures for the 6 months, which were 3 times what the initial projections had estimated. When the call ended, Oren sat in his office for a long time. Outside the window, the stars did not care about any of it. They never did. But somewhere in the dark between them, things were moving that the Dominion scanners had not yet found. The name of the moon was Calden. It was a small moon, cold and dim, orbiting a gas giant near the middle of the contested zone. A few hundred humans had settled there years ago, mostly farmers growing food crops in pressurized greenhouses for the nearby mining communities. There was nothing strategic about Calden. It had no military value, no significant resources, no particular position on any map that mattered. It was, by any honest measurement, unimportant. Fleet Sub-Commander Dahl had been in charge of the Calden sector for 2 months, and in those 2 months he had achieved nothing. His orders were to hold the sector and maintain control of the transit lanes. The human guerrilla units in his area had cut his supply lines 4 times, destroyed 2 of his patrol vessels, and made it impossible to move ground forces from one part of the sector to another without losses. His soldiers were tired. He was tired. Every report he sent up the chain came back with the same instruction: hold the position. He held it. And then, one evening, A small human scout craft crossed through his patrol zone and did not respond to hailing signals. Dahl ordered it destroyed. His gunship fired once, and the scout craft came apart cleanly. A short time later, one of his soldiers found that the craft had been automated. No pilot, no crew. A decoy. Dahl had no way of knowing that. He did not know it was a decoy. He did not know what it had been drawing his attention away from. He was frustrated and tired and operating at the edge of his patience. And when his intelligence officer flagged the Calden greenhouses as a potential resupply point for the human units harassing his sector, he made a decision. He ordered the bombardment of Calden. It was not a large bombardment. 2 ships, a short pass, enough to destroy the greenhouse structures and deny the humans whatever logistical value the settlement represented. His orders did not authorize civilian bombardment. The rules of engagement that the Dominion itself had established at the outset of the war explicitly prohibited targeting settlements from which the civilian population had not been confirmed as evacuated. Dahl knew this. He ordered it anyway, because he was tired of losing small and wanted to take something away from the enemy that felt real. The population of Calden had not been evacuated. It was small, and the evacuation networks had not yet reached that far into the contested zone. The people in those greenhouses were farmers, not soldiers. When the report came in, it included both the structural damage to the settlement and the casualty count, and the casualty count was not 0. The report reached Admiral Rena Vasile 11 hours later. She read it at her desk. She sat very still while she read it. The people who worked closest to her could not tell, from looking at her face, what she was thinking. She had a face that kept its own counsel. When she was done reading, she set the report down, and she sat with it for a moment, and then she picked up her communication line and connected to General Dax Holt. The call lasted less than a minute. She said, "Remove the limit." Holt said, "Understood." The call ended. Nobody in the room asked what that meant. The people in that room had all been briefed at the beginning of the war on what the phrase referred to. It referred to the standing operational constraint that had kept the human fleet out of deep Dominion space. It referred to the rule that human forces would respond to Dominion aggression at the border and in the contested zone, but would not push further in. It referred to the carefully maintained boundary between a defensive war and something else. Vasile had removed that boundary with 3 words. The first deep strikes began 42 hours later. They were not large engagements. They were precise ones. 3 Dominion fleet yards, 2 command relay stations, and a network of sensor arrays that covered the Dominion's primary approach corridor. None of these targets had any civilian function. All of them were purely military. The strikes were fast, and they were clean, and they were over before the Dominion's response forces could locate where they had come from. When the damage reports landed on Oren's desk the next morning, he read them in the same careful silence he brought to everything. His analysts had known, in an abstract way, that humanity might eventually push into Dominion space. They had modeled that scenario. What the models had not captured was the speed and the precision, or the fact that the targets were exactly the ones that would hurt the most without giving humanity any territory to hold and defend. The humans were not trying to take ground. They were cutting the wires. And there was something else in the reports that Oren's analysts flagged, which was that the locations of all 3 fleet yards, both relay stations, and the entire sensor network had required detailed prior intelligence to target with that level of accuracy. Intelligence that the Dominion had no record of humans gathering, which meant they had gathered it in secret, over a long period, without being detected. Which meant the humans had known the inside of Dominion space in considerable detail long before the war began. Oren called for the captured human data archive, the one taken from a ground skirmish 7 weeks earlier, which had been translated but not yet fully reviewed. He locked his office and spent 2 days reading it. It was a general history archive. Not military intelligence, just history. The history of one species on one planet, over several thousand years. Wars fought with primitive weapons, then better ones, then ones that could end everything. Diseases that had killed millions across whole continents, followed by the slow building of medicines that defeated them. Economic systems that had collapsed and been rebuilt and collapsed again and been rebuilt differently. And threaded through all of it, a pattern that Oren had not seen in the history of any of the other 61 species the Dominion had encountered. The humans never stopped. Every catastrophe was followed by recovery. Every loss was absorbed and built on. They had faced things that should have ended them by every rational model, and they had not ended. He put the archive down on the second day and looked at the wall for a long time. Then he thought about Dahl's decision to bomb Calden, and about the 3 words Vasile had spoken in response, and about the fleet yards that were now wreckage, and he understood something he had not understood before. The humans had not been fighting this war at full commitment. They had been holding something back, not because they were unable to escalate, but because they had chosen not to, and that choice had just been removed by one tired officer who had decided to bomb farmers. He picked up his communication line and connected to Counselor Neva. He did not say she had been right. He did not need to. Far away from all of it, Sergeant Arodin's unit was pulled back from Heron's Pass to a staging area they had never used before and given new equipment that was heavier than what they had carried before. Nobody explained the reason. Nobody had to. Din packed his kit, checked his gear, and pulled the letter from his jacket pocket. He looked at it for a long time. Then he put it back without adding anything. He was starting to think the words he needed were not the kind you put in a letter. There was a moment, somewhere in the 8th month of the war, when the Dominion's senior intelligence officers stopped trying to predict what humanity would do next and started simply reporting what humanity had already done. The shift was not announced. Nobody wrote a memo about it. It happened because the predictions kept being wrong, not by a small margin, but by a wide one, and the officers involved were professionals who understood the difference between a model that needed adjustment and a model that was fundamentally broken. The model was broken. So they stopped predicting and started recording, and they recorded everything they could find, and what they found was not encouraging. The human fleet had struck 23 targets inside Dominion space in the space of 6 weeks. Not border installations, not contested territory, not anything within the range that the Dominion had expected the humans to operate in. Deep targets, logistics hubs, fleet construction yards, the primary communications relay that connected the Dominion's eastern sectors to the Central Command. Every strike was surgical, every target was military, and every target, when reviewed afterward, had been chosen to degrade the Dominion's ability to sustain the war over the long term, rather than to win any single engagement. The humans were not trying to break the Dominion in one blow. They were dismantling it by pieces, patiently, in an order that suggested a very detailed understanding of exactly how the Dominion's infrastructure held itself together. Grand Marshal Oren had moved his command post twice in 6 weeks, not because he was afraid, though he was, but because 2 of the human strikes had come within uncomfortable proximity to his previous locations. The proximity was not coincidental. He knew that now. The humans knew where he was. They had chosen not to strike him directly, and he had spent a considerable amount of time thinking about why, and the most honest answer he could arrive at was that they did not need to. Removing him would slow nothing. The machine behind him would continue without him. On the ground, Sergeant Arodin was leading a 6-person unit through the tunnels beneath a Dominion-occupied world called Sector 5, which had no proper name because the Dominion had never given it one and the humans had always called it something in a regional dialect that did not translate well. The tunnels were old mining shafts, sealed for 30 years, mapped in detail by the original survey teams, and quietly shared with General Holt's planning department at the start of the war. Din moved slowly and without a light. The sensors on his equipment gave him enough to navigate. He had 2 broken ribs from an impact 3 days earlier that he had not yet reported, and every breath was a specific and private kind of pain that he had learned to work around. His unit had 6 hours to reach a junction beneath the Dominion's primary communications array for the occupied sector, do what they had come to do, and get back out before the shift rotation changed the patrol pattern above them. They had 4.5 hours left when they encountered a Dominion patrol that had not been on any schedule. The contact was brief. It was not clean. Din lost one person. Her name was Mia, and she had been in his unit for 3 years, and she had a way of laughing at nothing in particular that had made the long shifts bearable. He did not have time to think about that in the tunnel. He had time to secure the position, complete a head count, verify the objective, and move. He thought about Mia later, in the same quiet way he thought about the other names he carried, and he kept moving. They reached the junction. They did what they had come to do. They got out. Later, in a field station above the ground, Din sat against a wall and finally pulled out the letter he had been writing for years. He read it through from the beginning. It was a good letter. It said everything he had wanted to say when he started writing it. And those things were still true, but they were not the only things that were true anymore. He picked up a pen and added one paragraph at the bottom, about Mia, about the tunnel, about how the war felt from the ground. He did not try to make it sound like anything other than what it was. He still did not send it. He was not ready yet. Across the war, in a part of Dominion space that had never expected to see a human vessel, Grand Marshal Oren made his last major strategic decision. He had been running the numbers for 2 weeks, quietly, without sharing the results with his council. The numbers said the same thing each time. The Dominion was losing the war of attrition, slowly but without reversal. The human strikes were costing too much and arriving too precisely. The occupied territories were consuming more resources to hold than they had ever been projected to cost. And the Dominion's ability to reinforce and resupply was degrading at a rate that would become critical in approximately 4 more months. Oren did not believe in surrender. He believed in the kind of bold decision that changed the shape of a war. He had done it before, in 3 previous campaigns, and it had worked each time. The principle was simple. When the long game is being lost, force a short game. Concentrate everything on the enemy's center of gravity and move so fast that the tactical momentum becomes irreversible. He massed the Dominion's remaining fleet strength, everything that could be pulled from the occupied worlds, everything held in reserve, everything that could reach the gathering point in time, into a single striking force. And he aimed it at Earth. The logic was sound. The humans had been fighting with a fleet that operated across a wide front. They could not pull that fleet back to Earth quickly enough to meet the concentrated Dominion force. And a species, no matter how patient and disciplined, would commit to defending its homeworld. Oren had seen it before. The moment a civilization's home was under threat, the war became personal, and personal wars ended faster than calculated ones. The fleet arrived at Earth. What waited for them was not the fleet that had been fighting the war. That fleet was still behind them, across Dominion space, and it was still moving. What waited for them at Earth was a completely separate force, fresh ships, full readiness, crews that had not been in combat for a single day of the war, sitting in careful formation as if they had been there for months, because they had been there for months. A reserve that had never been committed. A second fleet that the Dominion's intelligence had never found, because it had never moved, had never transmitted anything that needed to be intercepted, had simply existed in waiting above the human homeworld for the entire duration of the war. Oren looked at the tactical display and felt something he had not felt in 60 years of military service. He felt cold. Aboard the Dominion capital station, Ambassador Solis received a short message from Admiral Vasile. She read it once. Then she packed a small bag with the things she had collected over 9 months of reading in the station library, including the small notebook she had filled with careful notes, and she informed Officer Wren that she would be returning to human space within the next 24 hours. Wren asked who had authorized that. Solis looked at her steadily and said, "Ask your command." Wren received the answer very quickly after that, and said nothing more. The fleet around Earth did not fire first. It waited. It had been waiting for months, and a little longer made no difference. The humans were patient like that. They were patient like people who had grown up knowing the world could end and had decided, generation after generation, that it would not end today. And then the long wait was over. The ceasefire request came through the same relay humanity had used to send the warning. It was addressed, by name, to Ambassador Lyra Solis, who was already on board the transport that had retrieved her from the Dominion capital station 6 hours earlier. The message was from Counselor Neva, and it was brief, and it used the word please, which was not something the Dominion had put in any official communication in 3 centuries. Neva had written it herself, without running it past the remaining members of the War Council, because the remaining members of the War Council had spent the last 4 days in increasingly panicked meetings and were not currently in a condition to make good decisions. Solis forwarded the message to Admiral Vasile without comment. Vasile read it, and, within the hour, issued the stand-down order for all offensive operations. Commanders across the fleet acknowledged the order and held their positions. No one pushed further. No one fired an extra shot just because the window was still open. The order said stand down, and they stood down, because that was what the order said, and humans had a particular way of following orders that came from someone they trusted, which was completely, until given a reason to do otherwise. The battles that were already in progress finished. The ones that had not yet started did not start. The war had a hard edge, and humanity placed its hand on that edge and stopped. The silence after was not peaceful. It was just quiet. Those are different things. General Dax Holt received the ceasefire order on the surface of a contested world where his forces had been advancing for 9 hours. He read it, acknowledged it, and told his unit commanders to dig in where they were. He did a head count of his section of the line. He noted the ones who had not made it through the last push. He added their names to the list he kept in a small folder, which he had been keeping since the first week of the war. He had always kept lists. Lists were how you made sure you did not forget. The formal peace meeting happened 3 weeks later. It took place on neutral ground, a station that belonged to neither side, a small scientific outpost far from the contested zones, staffed by 2 researchers who were extremely confused about why their facility had suddenly become important. The researchers were politely relocated to a different section of the station for the duration. Ambassador Solis sat across a plain table from Counselor Neva. There were other people in the room, advisors, security, a communications officer on each side. But the conversation was largely between those two, because Neva had specifically requested Solis by name, and because Solis was the person humanity had chosen for this work from the beginning. Solis presented the peace terms. They were not long. Humanity required full withdrawal from all occupied territories within 90 days. It required reparations paid to the civilian populations that had been displaced by the war, calculated according to a formula that was attached as an appendix. It required access to all Dominion records relating to the civilizations the Dominion had absorbed or destroyed over the past 3 centuries, including any data that still existed on the languages, histories, and populations of those peoples. Neva read the terms carefully. She had expected something punitive. She had prepared herself for demands that would cripple the Dominion for generations. These terms were hard, but they were not impossible, and they did not read like the terms of a species that wanted to rule over what it had beaten. She asked Solis why humanity wanted the records of absorbed civilizations. Solis said, because someone should have them. Neva looked at her for a moment. Then she signed the agreement. The meeting between Grand Marshal Oren and Admiral Rena Vasile happened separately and informally on the deck of Vasile's flagship. Oren had requested it personally. He had surrendered command through the official channels already, but he had asked for this meeting on top of that, and Vasile had agreed to it without asking why. They met in a plain room with 2 chairs and a narrow window that looked out at the stars. Oren was still in his uniform. So was Vasile. They were both tired in the way that people are tired when they have been carrying something heavy for a long time. Oren studied her throughout the brief, formal exchange of documents. She was not what he had pictured. He had built an image of her in his mind over the course of the war, based on what her decisions implied about her, and the image he had built was larger and colder than the person sitting across from him. Vasile was quiet, and she was careful, and she had tired eyes, and she accepted his surrender with the same level expression she seemed to bring to everything. When the formalities were done, Oren asked her one question. He asked what would have happened if the Dominion had simply left humanity alone. Vasile was quiet for a moment. She looked at the window. Then she looked back at him, and she answered him honestly, in the way that someone answers a question when the war is already over and the truth costs nothing. She said, nothing, probably. Humanity had a great deal of work left to do at home. They had been expanding slowly because they chose to expand slowly. They would likely have made contact with the Dominion eventually, through trade routes or exploration, and they might have built something together that was useful to both sides. Oren was quiet for a long time. Then he nodded once, slowly, and stood, and left the room. Vasile stayed by the window for a while after he was gone. Sergeant Arodin was on a transport heading home. He had been told he would be home within the week, and he believed it because there was nothing left to hold him out there. Heron's Pass was being handed back. The contested zones were quieting. The automated networks in the occupied worlds were being deactivated by remote signal, which was a strange thing to watch. A whole planet's worth of hidden systems going dark all at once because someone on a ship far away had entered a code. He sat in the cargo bay because the cargo bay was quiet. He had the letter in his hand. He had added 3 more paragraphs to it since the tunnel on Sector 5, and he thought he might add 1 more now, at the end, now that there was an end to write about. He read through the whole thing one more time. Then he folded it and held it and thought about his sister and about what it would be like to be in the same room as her, and about the fact that he had been writing this letter for 4 years, and the things he had been trying to say were still true, but were also smaller now. Smaller in a good way. Smaller because he was nearly home, and the things you want to say to someone are smaller when you are nearly home. He put the letter in his pocket. He would say it in person. Back on Earth, in the weeks after the ceasefire, humanity began the quiet work of sending data packages to every inhabited world that had once belonged to the civilizations the Dominion had absorbed. Languages, names, histories, art, records of places and people and traditions that had been cataloged by the Dominion in their original conquest, and then filed away and forgotten. Solis had brought home a data chip with 11 months of careful notes and copied records from the Dominion's own library, and it seeded a recovery effort that would take decades and would never be complete, because some things cannot be recovered once they are lost. But some things could. And humanity, having won the war, put the weapons down and picked up the older and slower work of putting things back together. The final warning had said what it meant. So had everything that came after it. No one who had been paying attention was surprised.